So where is all this growth going to come from? Well, to help me answer that, I'm delighted to say I'm joined by Ed Davey, Britain's Minister for Employment Relations. Thank you very much for joining us today. If we just look at what the Institute for Fiscal Studies said there, generally they like the idea that the deficit has to be cut and that we have to move forward, but would it not be almost reckless not to have a couple of other ways of getting to that point and not just sticking quite so rigidly to George Osborne's plans?
Well, certainly the British government welcomes the endorsement from the Independent Institute for Fiscal Studies. It backs what the IMF, the OECD and many commentators have said. The British government has taken strong, firm, determined and early action to tackle our record deficit. That has boosted confidence. We've seen the 10-year bond markets, the yields drop since the election, and that's a vote of confidence. When you've seen elsewhere in Europe some sovereign debt crises, I think the difference is very stark. So I think confidence is returning. But there's no easy answer, there's no silver bullet. Getting confidence and stability right is the prerequisite, and then I think we can get on with the other tasks that we need to restore growth.
And yet other major and influential economists point to the concerns over stagflation, this idea that inflation is rising. We've seen growth contract. Not to get back into the concerns about the snow, it may have been a one-off, hopefully it was, but either way, there is a concern that we've got a slowing of growth, an increase of inflation. Stagflation would be a real problem for the UK.
Yeah, I don't agree with those economists talking about stagflation at all. I think if you look at our policy framework on the independent bank, I think that should give investors a lot of reassurance. The Monetary Policy Committee will take the action that it deems necessary. They're independent of government and therefore they are credible. And I would also add that if you look ahead, yes, there's been some shocks on prices coming from oil, for example. We've had to increase VAT, our sales tax here in the UK, in order to deal with some of the budget deficit problems, but that will then wash through the figures. The underlying inflationary pressures are less than I think some analysts have given credit to. For example, wage inflation is very much under control.
So you feel that inflation will start to come down and growth will start to come up. Both of those will prevent stagflation?
Yes.
Just to be very clear. Now, you talked there a little bit about wage pressure and rather the lack of it. There is real concern, is there not, about industrial relations. We've seen we've seen strikes, general strikes in Greece. We've seen a situation in Ireland. The UK so far very different from that, it has to be said. You're dealing presumably with the unions at the moment. There are calls for strike action. How well is this new coalition government getting on with the unions? How well are talks going?
Well, we're engaging with the unions, frankly, on a weekly basis. Colleagues of mine like Francis Maud, but also the Chancellor, the Prime Minister, the Deputy Prime Minister, Secretary of State for Business, Vince Cable. We've all been ensuring that we are listening to the trade unions and also explaining the government's approach. And we're not going about this deficit reduction process, which is losing people's jobs, I'm afraid to say, in the public sector. We're not going about it with any relish. It's just that we have to do it. We have to take tough decisions. But as we go about taking those decisions, we want to take the country with us, we want to take the unions with us, we want to take those people with us. And the way we'll do that is by explaining why we're doing it and going about it in a humane, compassionate way, which is what we will do.
Now, what really needs to happen, of course, is that there is growth. You've said that from long before you were in power, that the idea of cutting all these jobs in the public sector is that they miraculously appear in the private sector because of growth. How is that going to happen in concrete terms? Are we going to see things in Osborne's budget in March that are going to actually give growth a real kickstart? I mean, the CBI could give you a long list of things that they'd like to see.
Well, I believe we've already been taking some of those measures, but we do have the 2011 growth review. This is a process leading up to the budget where we're looking at a whole range of sectors. We're also looking at a number of key issues which business and industry have complained about, where we may well need some structural reform. So we'll be coming to Parliament and to the country with a whole set of proposals, whether it's on trade and investment. We'll be publishing a trade investment white paper.
Any tax breaks in there?
Well, I'll let the Chancellor deal with the taxation system. I think you'll expect me to say that. But if you look at across the piece, employment legislation, which I'm in charge of, we've already proposed quite a major change on employment tribunals, widely welcomed by business.
Indeed.
So a whole set of microeconomic supply-side reforms to ensure we have deregulation, we put a focus on exports, a focus on investment. That is, I think, what business needs to see.
OK, Mr Davey, thank you very much indeed for joining us today.
Thank you.